Winter kept us warm.
These fragments I have shored against my ruins.
April is the cruelest month.
Datta, Dayadhvam, Damyata.
Very strange. It seems like you start to get into a groove, and then suddenly it shifts, like that last line.
So yes, The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot. I sat upon the shore fishing with the arid plain behind me. Shall I at least set my lands in order? London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. These fragments I have shored against my ruins. Why then I'll fit you. Hieronymo's mad again. Datta, Dayadhvam, Damyata. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. These are the final, or some of the final lines of T.S. Eliot's great poem, The Wasteland. And I think we hear in some of these final lines, at the very least, the strangeness of the poem. We have different languages. We have maybe a bit of a nursery rhyme in there. The line that stands out most to me there at the end is where he says, these fragments I have shored against my ruins. And in some way, the whole poem can feel like fragments.
Yeah.
Like a series of fragments. So yes, The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, written, 1921?
Something like that, 21.
In the aftermath of the First World War.
Yeah.
And it's a poem of about 12 pages or so, with 5 principal parts to it. The first is called The Burial of the Dead. The second is called A Game of Chess. The third, The Fire Sermon. The fourth, Death by Water. And the fifth, What the Thunder Said. Yeah. How would you describe the poem? Just kind of an overall 30,000-foot take on it.
Yeah, it feels like fragments, like you said. It's hard to see the unity of it. Aside from recurring images, at first blush, you don't tend to see the unity of it. It seems like it's not usually a good idea to treat poetry as a mystery you need to solve, right? But this one really provokes that desire, right, to figure out what's going on, because it does give you certain feelings right away, but it doesn't. It's hard to tell exactly why, at least at the first reading of it. It draws from many languages, right? There's Italian, there's French,
German,
there's Greek, there's Latin, Sanskrit, right? In the Damyata stuff, the 3 things that the thunder said at the end there, and Shanti. It feels like it's a composite in many ways, right? A composite of even parts of the world, right? But it's nevertheless, as a whole, it's still, I think it strikes one as having a kind of unity. Again, not just because of recurring images, although that's an important part of it, I think. But at least the way I read it, it's the emotions I experience in each of the parts are basically the same, but also complex, right? Sort of, there's fear, there's a kind of grief or despair, and not much hope to balance out any of that. It's as though you're experiencing dying, right? Either as on a personal level or around you. And it seems like that's part of what he's trying to evoke in the reader. I don't think it's just me. I think that's much of the poem, even though it does end with those calls for peace, right? Shanti, right?
Yeah, I guess for the sake of our listeners or viewers, it's worth mentioning that while it'd be very difficult to say what this poem is about in any kind of literal traditional way, there are recurring images, or at least images that have similarities to them. So there's London plays a prominent role in the poem. The London of T.S. Eliot's day. And then
the Thames River, or the Thames River, I guess.
Right. The Thames River and allusions
London
to other
Bridge,
buildings. You've got many images involving the relationship between men and women. Conversations between a man and a woman. Allusions to female characters from even early on back in the ancient Greek world.
Yeah, right.
Tiresias is
Tiresias.
a figure who's, even by Eliot's own words, very prominent within the poem. And he's a Greek figure that shows up in Homer and in some of the tragedies.
Yeah, a soothsayer, right?
A soothsayer with
sort.
a strange take on both the male and female worlds. He's described as an old man with female breasts.
Yeah, that's right.
And then we've got, as you say, a number of images that have to do with decay. Sometimes it seems to be literally the kind of destruction that occurred in the wake of the First World War, but then also just scenes from the natural world or from history that allude to death, to dying, to a loss of love, the absence of passion. And so through these callbacks to different authors and depictions from Eliot's own encounter with nature and his culture, we get sort of an impression, almost a kaleidoscopic impression of what he's calling the wasteland.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. Kaleidoscopic is a nice image for it, because it has that composite feel to it. And let me add too that to stress something you said there, it does, a lot of it seems to turn around relationships between men and women and relationships that seem dysfunctional and destructive, right? Like either marriages that are unhappy, or there's several references to rape. Maybe an occasional, there's one instance that might be a reference to an abortion, and even another instance where a couple may have had sex but didn't want to have sex, or they felt bad afterwards. And so it seems like a large engine of the story is the image of the relationship between spouses, or at least between a man and a woman, lovers, I should say, right? And relationships gone wrong in some way or other. And that fits with the recurring image of the aridity and sterility of the wasteland itself. There's no children. You notice that there's no children, lots of couples, but no children in the poem.
Yeah, I guess there's one in the very opening scene.
Oh, yeah,
there's a kind of reference to childhood.
Yeah, right.
Well, it might be worth just us reading the opening block of text there.
You want me to do it? Or?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. This is the beginning of the burial of the dead, right? And I think it's helpful to keep in mind the titles as you read to the sections, right? April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. Winter kept us warm, covering earth in forgetful snow, feeding a little life with dried tubers. Summer surprised us, coming over the Starnbergese. With a shower of rain, we stopped in the colonnade and went on in sunlight into the Hofgarten and drank coffee and talked for an hour. Okay, here we go. I'm going to try to pronounce this. Bin gar klein Russen stammen aus Litauen echt Deutsch. And when we were children, staying at the Archduke's, my cousins, he took me out on a sled, and I was frightened. He said, Marie, Marie, hold on tight. And down we went. In the mountains, there you feel free. I read much of the night and go south in the winter. Very strange. It seems like you start to get into a groove, and then suddenly it shifts, like that last line feels out of place.
And good job on the German, by the way. Even the very opening line, April is the cruelest month.
Yeah.
And then followed a little bit later, winter kept us warm.
Yeah.
So that in itself speaks to a kind of, you're set up for one thing, but then something else happens you're set up for something positive, and then the negative occurs. Right? Yeah. April, springtime, no, it's the cruelest month.
Yeah. And winter is good, keeps you warm, right? The covering of snow is like nestles you in a blanket. Yeah, it's sometimes said that the beginning, this whole section that I read, or at least maybe the first 8 or 10 lines of it, is supposed to be read parallel to the beginning of the Canterbury Tales, which begins about April, the beauty of spring and April, and it's the time that people who have suffered through the winter, through illnesses, or through injuries that in virtue of prayer they've recovered from, or at least they give credit to the prayer. And it says, and as a result of that, now in the spring, this is when we make our pilgrimage to St. Thomas Becket's tomb in Canterbury, right? That's when so they're marching along, talking about the narrator at the opening of the Canterbury Tales is describing the people marching along, enjoying nature. This is the time of going to God and giving thanks. That's how I remember it, at least.
That's so interesting because on the one hand, there's something like the Canterbury Tales that characterizes this poem as a whole, namely simply the diversity of voices.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's right.
And the different kind of, at least, allusions to stories that pop up throughout here. But on the other hand, I'm thinking of the fifth part, What the Thunder Said, where we do approach a chapel, similar to the way in which the pilgrims in Chaucer would approach Canterbury Cathedral. But the chapel here it's empty. He says it's only the wind's home. No windows, and the door swings. And then you get some rain. But yeah, that in itself just struck me in light of what you were saying, that to the extent that there's even a pilgrimage possible here, it seems to meet with something very different from what Chaucer's pilgrims know that they're going to encounter at the end of their journey.
Yeah, you get the impression that one of the aspects of this story that you're supposed to notice is the absence of God, right? Or the absence of, or that faith is something we once had, maybe, right? But it's a thing of the past. We've grown out of that, something like that, right? So that would sort of fit with the allusion to the Canterbury Tales, but a distaste for April, for spring, right? And a preference for winter. And it's even a distaste for the new life, and those first two lines, the new life that comes up with spring rains, right? Lilacs being breeding out of the land. The narrator, whoever he is, right, seems to think lilacs are a smelly plant that's ruining my sleep here in the snow, right?
Yeah.
And it's stirring up memories and old desires. I think that's sort of the impression of those first 6 lines or so.
Just to remind ourselves of the fragmentary nature of the poem. So we heard the bizarre lines that end it, and then we get this scene regarding April and a kind of childhood memory connected with Germany at the very beginning of the poem. Then you have, just to take a selection at random here, in the third part of the poem, which is called the Fire Sermon, you hear these words. This is around line 187. A rat crept softly through the vegetation, dragging its slimy belly on the bank while I was fishing in the dull canal on a winter evening round behind the gas house, musing upon the king my brother's wreck and on the king my father's death before him. White bodies naked on the low damp ground and bones cast in a little low dry garret, rattled by the rat's foot only year to year. But at my back from time to time I hear the sound of horns and motors, which shall bring Sweeney to Mrs. Porter in the spring. Oh, the moon shone bright on Mrs. Porter, and on her daughter they washed their feet in soda water. Twit, 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 jug, 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 so rudely forced. Yeah. Now, what this means, it's hard to say, but it's another distinct sort of image. And very different from the ones we've looked at. So I guess before we go much further, it seems like something we've got to reckon with in this poem has to do with a conception of unity. Now, before you would mention that it seems like there may be some sense of unity we can glean here, but perhaps one way to press the question would be that the very difficulty we have in asserting some sort of narrative line. Well, okay, either a sort of single image, like maybe a Robert Frost poem might give us, or just a trajectory that a single character or a group of discernible characters is on. Neither of that seems to be here. So how in the world would we even begin to say that this poem is unified? Could we look to maybe something at the outset a little more abstract, like just its tone? Is there a unity in terms of the kind of feeling or voice that this poem has?
Yeah, I think there is something to that, aside from the particular emotions that I mentioned earlier, that there is something, there's a lot that's in the first person, or I should say the first person narration is recurring, right? It turns up in the first stanza, or someone addressing either the reader or the author as the Son of Man, right, is mentioned there. And I guess it suggests a kind of narration that's going on. And in the section you were just reading now, I think, is that that's where Tyreseius speaks in the first person, around line 218 or so.
Yeah.
He describes himself as witnessing all of these things, right? He says, he first speaks at line 218, but further down line 228 or so, he says, I, Tyreseius, old man with wrinkled dugs, perceived the scene and foretold the rest. I too awaited the expected guest. I, Tyreseius, have foresuffered all, and acted on this same divan or bed. I, who have sat by Thebes below the wall, and walked among the lowest of the dead. One of the few rhymes in this, right? You read the soda water and Mrs. Porter's daughter line, right? But it suggests here, and as Eliot himself says explicitly in the notes that he published with this, that this might be a failing on his own part that he has to actually say it in the notes, but he says Tyreseius is in one way or another running throughout the whole, right? And he's in some way privy to the whole, I don't want to say narrative arc, because I'm not sure there is one, but that he's sort of the unidentified, for the most part, unidentified witness of all these things, both of the male and the female perspectives on these things. And I wonder if he wants us to think about this character. Tyreseius turns up in all the plays as sort of an important character. I'm talking about the Greek plays, the tragedies. An important character, but not really one of the main characters. He usually comes in to give his counsel or his opinion about what he's been observing is happening in the city, right? Whether what the prophecy is behind Oedipus's lineage, right? Or who's polluted the city of Thebes in Oedipus Rex, or he appears in Antigone as well. At any rate, so he is sort of a bystander. He's like the chorus in some respects. He's sort of outside the story, but witnessing and commenting on it. And it seems like maybe Eliot expects us to see Tyreseius's testimony and presence as both judging what he's observing and enduring it in some way, and executing the things that, or bringing about the things that are happening. Because he says in the note that I'm referring to earlier, something like he is present in both the males and the females of the story. And he kind of says something like that. He says, I have foresuffered all enacted on this bed, right? This is describing a scene, what is, you might call it a non-explicit rape.
Yeah.
Right, where there's a couple and a male and a female who have some understanding, and the woman is depressed. The guy comes and simply takes advantage of her, and she just doesn't care. Right? She doesn't object, but she doesn't. She's not involved, if you will. She's passive.
Yeah.
Right. And so it almost seems like he's saying Tyreseius is witnessing this. He is the victim of it, and he is the perpetrator of it, of the very same things. So in some ways, Tyreseius seems like one of the principles of unity in the tale, or in the poem, I should say. Again, I should resist the idea of calling it a tale.
Yeah, that in itself leads to this further issue, which is, okay, why Tyreseius, or even a figure like him in the first place, right? This character that shows up as far back as the Greek tragedies and is through and through, you might say, ambiguous. I mean, quite literally ambiguous in terms of his very physiology. There's something, in a way, comprising both genders, male and female about him, which also could be an indication that even the very difference between the two may be somehow precarious or at risk, as presented in the poem. But he is, while in some ways central, and surely we have more to say about that, he's one of a number of figures that are mentioned or alluded to, again, from the entire course of the Western tradition. Why is Eliot doing that? It makes among other things, it has the effect of making the poem even more difficult, right?
Yeah.
So you're, as you mentioned before, you're constantly alluding back, sometimes in different languages,
Yeah.
to these authors who've come
Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
You can barely read 5 lines of The Wasteland without encountering some allusion or reference
Yeah.
to a previous author
Or an explicit quotation.
or an explicit quotation.
right.
Why is that happening? It's as though the fragments that are mentioned at the end are fragments of the very tradition that has preceded Eliot.
Yeah.
So
And they're not being reassembled into a whole exactly. It's kind of remaining.
Yeah.
They're being gathered, as he says, right, in the final line. But they're not making a new edifice, if you will, into a whole.
yeah. So what do you think he's doing there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I can only guess. I mean, I'll begin by agreeing with you and sort of maybe even supporting what you're saying. He's expecting a lot for people to know these languages, right? I don't think there's any edition of this that's ever published that doesn't have footnotes to tell people what the translation is. Now, it's probably true in the early 20th century. More people are more likely, even more British people are more likely to know French, maybe Italian, maybe even Greek and Latin, but Sanskrit?
Yeah.
No one's going to know. Or German, maybe, right? Certainly, in other words, nowadays, the impediment to reading this with profit without a lot of help is gotten even greater. But I think it would have been really tough at the time. And he himself published the notes shortly after he first published the poem, like within a month or something, he published these notes, which he had composed long before. Mm-hmm. So he himself knew that this is unintelligible by itself.
It's inaccessible.
Yeah, it's not reachable. And to say nothing of what you said, that there's many more allusions to things that are not explicitly quoted, right? There's phrases that if you know Dante really well, you'll recognize that's sort of a version of something that's said in Dante in the Divine Comedy. But it's not in quotation marks. It's not in Italian in the cases I'm thinking about. So he's expecting the reader to have profound knowledge of, you might say, the Western canon and of the great poetry. You got Dante, you've got Shakespeare's Tempest, you've got the Arthurian tale of Tristan and Isolde. You've got, he says there's many references, he says in the notes that refer to references to the Fisher King and Arthur Grail legends, right?
You got Conrad.
Yeah, is that right?
In the Heart of Darkness, the description of the barges.
Oh, that's from Conrad. Yeah, and that will be contemporary with him as well.
Augustine's Confessions.
Confessions, right? And of course, the Gospels. There's several very quick allusions to passages from the Gospels. He's not a Christian at this point in his life, but he expects the reader to sort of catch these things, at least upon rereading, right? And it's hard not to say, okay, well, you're demanding a lot.
Yeah, and even beyond that, one could think, okay, Eliot, you're incredibly well educated.
Yeah.
And you're up to something here, but it smacks highly of a kind of elitism.
Yeah, educational elitism.
And almost, it's showing off.
Yeah.
And so what would be, if that's not simply to hold that sort of accusation, what sort of reading would make sense of this? As though to say, it's really appropriate to what he's up to that he be drawing on all of these dozens of works and authors who've come before him.
Yeah, I wonder if it goes back to what you were saying earlier about these being fragments, or part of what he's trying to show you is the difficulty of composing a unified piece of poetry in an age in which the Western civilization is breaking apart, right? And it's sort of a case where that expression, the medium is the message, in a way, right? The way he's telling presenting this poem, right, is a part of what he's trying to tell you.
Interesting. Can you say some more?
Yeah, well, it's just that if he thinks that, he says all these, he gives that list. He talks about the unreal city, which at first is about London, right? But the next time he refers to it, he gives a list of cities, Vienna and Jerusalem and Athens.
Yeah.
He says all unreal, right? I don't think he says all, but he just says unreal after that. As if to say, he's imagining that society is in some way in decay. And And I can't help but thinking that that has something to do with the decay of the relationship between man and woman that he's presenting as well. And so he's sort of showing you the disjointedness of the thing he's imitating, if you will, is the disjointedness of reality by giving you a disjointed image that is no longer one enough for you to, the reality is no longer one enough for you to readily see unity in the poem, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Making sense?
One way in which the disjointedness comes across, and this maybe goes back to something along the lines of the tone, is and I'm thinking specifically of the way in which what ought to be very dramatic events or scenes end up being cast in such a way that there's something very unremarkable,
flat,
almost flat or empty about them. So the scene where the women are talking in the pub. One woman's talking to her friends, and in the background you have the bartender with his own voice. But she's just casually describing this conversation she had with another friend about this friend's husband, Albert, coming home from the war. And she had some money to fix herself up so it looked good for him and kind of show him a good time. But in fact, she had an abortion after having had several kids already. And the whole thing is just a barroom conversation. And it's entirely casual.
Doesn't seem like poetry.
Doesn't seem like poetry. And there's something incredibly awful, not just about the things that are being described, but about the way these things are being presented to the reader.
Sort of trivially, like they're trivial, unimportant things.
Yeah. So is that part of the disjoint here, is that he's noticing the context, the human events which ought to be meaningful, either really good ones or really bad ones, have somehow lost a context within which they can be meaningful.
I guess that's probably something to that. I mean, it's not just, I mean, to add to that, it's not just a criticism. It's not as though he's standing outside the world and judging it, but he's saying, we want this. I myself want this. It begins with him saying April is cruel, right? And I miss winter, where I didn't have memories of the way things used to be stirred up, right? And desires are being pricked by this, by spring, reminding me of life. It's as though he's saying that we all have preferred death or the wasteland that we're in right now. And I guess, yes, so not sure how to put it exactly. It's a confession of guilt, but sense that there's no escape mixed in as well. There's again no element of hope that I see in this. Just a sense of things getting worse, and that rain is a bad thing. Fear death by water is something that's said by the tarot card reader to a gentleman early in part 2.
That's okay. I'm going to have to come back to that.
Sure.
What you're saying there about water. That's an interesting claim. But maybe we could read the text that you just referred to, where we have Madame Sosostris in the opening pages of the poem. So this comes after the childhood recollection that we read at the outset, and then we have Madame Sosostris, famous clairvoyante, had a bad cold. Nevertheless, is known to be the wisest woman in Europe, with a wicked pack of cards. Here, said she, is your card, the drowned Phoenician sailor. Those are pearls that were his eyes. Look. Here is Belladonna, the lady of the rocks, the lady of situations. Here is the man with 3 staves, and here the wheel, and here is the one-eyed merchant. And this card, which is blank, is something he carries on his back, which I am forbidden to see. I do not find the hanged man. Fear death by water. I see crowds of people walking round in a ring. Thank you. If you see dear Mrs. Equitone, tell her I bring the horoscope myself. One must be so careful these days. The reference to the drowned Phoenician sailor comes up later in the 4th part of the poem, which is called Death by Water. But this is one of the oddest images, because we get this switch to a woman who is a clairvoyant with her pack of tarot cards
Yeah.
and the different images on them. What's the meaningfulness here? Well, what does this bring to the poem?
Yeah.
What's Eliot doing with this?
Yeah. Maybe it relates to, I mean, he's in some ways introducing, as it were, characters. He says this as well in the notes. The characters that appear later, as you mentioned, the Phoenician sailor. But maybe it's also a sign of the things people do when there's no God in their horizon, right?
Mm-hmm.
When if you're searching for meaning, but you don't want all the baggage that comes with a organized religion, you might dabble in something like the tarot cards. It's safer, it might seem, right? And you can sort of get the benefit of confidence about the future without the life-changing demands of actually becoming a believer in some religion.
Yeah, so it kind of prescribes a role for you in some way,
Yeah.
too, and an identity even.
Yeah, and gives you counsel as well. I mean, if part of the issue is you don't know how to live your life because as far as you can tell, you're not in the hands of a God who has a plan, right? Let's go see the tarot reader, right? And she tells you, well, fear death by water. Right? Watch out for that. There's going to be a lady of situations in your life ahead. But there are puzzles as well, right? That's interesting. What the card that's blank, he says, it's something he carries on his back, which I'm forbidden to see, right? Mm-hmm. It's sort of an admission that she doesn't have any, that she's not a goddess, right? She's not telling you the future with some sort of divine authority. But it's also just business for her. The ending of that, I thought was remarkable, right? So I see crowds of people walking around in a ring, right? That sounds really ominous. And that's the end of the reading. I guess the fellow says, thank you. And she says, if you see Miss Equitone, I'm going to bring the fortunes, the horoscopes to her. Right? As if to say, we want something supernatural, something like providence or fate in our lives. But at the end of the day, we know it's just sort of a game, right? This is just something we do to reassure ourselves, tickle that itch that we have for
and on her part for money.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, right.
Well, and it connects up again with, I think it's toward the end of the third part, the fire sermon, that we have that allusion to Augustine coming to Carthage, burning in the Confessions. Yeah. And it's around that time in Augustine's life that he's also confronted with astrology.
Yeah. Oh,
and he has this discussion early on in the Confessions about this appeal that it holds for him and other young people around his age. But then he, at the same time, already then has these kind of presentiments as to what might be problematic with astrology. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that just because he sees a problem, that he's
going to wash his hands.
To Christianity, right?
And turn to...
We're kind of stuck in the cauldron, burning in Carthage here still.
Yeah, and the imagery associated with Carthage, I don't remember if he associates it with Dido in that passage. Is that right?
But it comes soon after his description of the Aeneid.
Okay, so. Is that right? Yeah. Because I was thinking that at least Dido, whether fairly or not, we could argue about the Aeneid, but Dido is associated with lust, right? And she's sort of treated as being the seductress of Aeneas, right? I think he deserves a little bit of the blame or responsibility for that, everything going south between the two of them. But at any rate, Carthage and Dido, they're sort of an image of a place of sexual decadence. And of course, Augustine is trying to separate himself from that side of himself, as well as before his conversion, right? Yeah. That he's saying these things. So it seems like that's part of that reference to the burning, right? The burning of lust, right? There's that line in St. Paul, better to marry than to burn, right? And I think it's lust he's referring to there in that context.
Yeah, so that's an interesting sort of train of images to focus on, that we've got the scene in the Aeneid involving Carthage with Dido and Aeneas, Augustine dealing with lust, caught up in lust in Carthage, and then the way it shows up here. What strikes me about those two earlier works is that there's a very a vivid, a definitive presentation of the elements involved there, right? That this is, you do have this intense passion between Aeneas and Dido, but then he's got a vocation
the gods
remind him of. And she so despairs
Yeah.
of his leaving that she kills herself.
Yeah.
Right? And then Augustine remarks upon the way in which he was damning himself
Yeah.
by being involved with these lustful relationships in Carthage. Here, what do we have? We have a few lines calling back to that image.
Yeah.
But it's, again, set within this fragmentary context,
Yeah.
so that you wonder, what is Eliot trying to do?
Yeah.
Why does this particular fragment show up in the way it does?
Yeah.
Is it meant to give another kind of sort of prismatic look at this issue between the sexes that
Yeah.
you were referring to?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, it seems like it's surely got to be part of that. But it's also to express some of the unease, or maybe I should say the mixed feelings that the narrator is expressing, I guess, about wanting things to be the way they are, but at the same time realizing that something's been lost, I guess. We can't go back to the days of Augustine coming to the faith. Again, I don't see in here much drive towards, certainly not Christianity, despite using Christian images now and again, but more a sense of we are stuck in a rut, right? And we are, as a people, you might say, killing ourselves. We're at least dying. The cities are unreal, right? There's so many images of death, and there's Rat's Alley in the passage you read, right? And burial of the dead is the beginning of the first section.
No children, just to
No
reiterate.
children, yeah. And the burial of the dead title of that first section, right, is juxtaposed a few lines after that with, we like the blanket of snow that we were buried under, right? So the speaker is dead, I think, in some way, or recognizing his own death as coming. There's even something like that, I think, in what the thunder said about how we are dying patiently.
With a little patience.
Yeah. You have it?
Yeah.
Where is that?
It's
I thought that was in what the thunder said. Yeah, there it is. It's the beginning of what the thunder said. Right. And he tells you in the notes that if you don't catch it, some of these images are supposed to refer to Gethsemane before Christ's death. So I'll just read the first, whatever that is, 8 lines or so. After the torchlight red on sweaty faces, after the frosty silence in the gardens, after the agony in stony places, the shouting and the crying, prison and palace and reverberation of thunder of spring over distant mountains. He who was living is now dead. We who were living are now dying with a little patience. And then he starts this long image of being in the desert where there's no rain and you're dry. So I was thinking, it's a lot of it is saying that the world around us is dying and we are virtually dead, and part of us wants to be dead, right? Wants to stay in winter, right? Covered and buried in snow, right? We're frustrated by spring coming with its rains and bringing plant life and stirring life again. But maybe just to twist it, since we're actually in what the thunder said, this is the first place where water seems to become a good thing, right? We talked about the Phoenician sailor, right? Fear death by water, right? Death by water appears another time where it seems like it's a bad thing, right? It's predicted as being a bad thing.
Yeah.
Madame Sosostris says, watch out for that. But you're missing water in the final section, right? You're sort of rejecting your old, maybe this goes to addressing your question about the unity of this, but you wanting water to come back, you're wanting rain, right? It opened with you frustrated, the narrator, frustrated by the presence of rain, April showers, and it bringing Mayflowers, right? I'm tempted to read the whole next 30 lines, but it's kind of a lot. Maybe I'll pick some of it. How about that?
Yeah.
So here is no water, but only rock. Rock and no water and the sandy road, the road winding above the mountains, which are mountains of rock without water. If there were water, we should stop and drink. Amongst the rock, one cannot stop or think. Sweat is dry and feet are in the sand. If there were only water amongst the rock, dead mountain, mouth of carious teeth that cannot spit. Here one can neither stand nor lie nor sit. There is not even silence in the mountains. but dry, sterile thunder without rain. There's not even solitude in the mountains, but red, sullen faces sneer and snarl from doors of mud-cracked houses. If there were water and no rock, if there were rock and also water, and water, a spring, a pool among the rocks, if there were the sound of water only, not the cicada and the dry grass singing, but sound of water over a rock, where the hermit thrush sings in the pine trees, drip, drop, drip, drop, 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 but there is no water. Yeah, I read more than I intended to, but at any rate, you see that you're in the desert. I mean, as a Christian or a Jew, you might recognize this as an image of being in the desert, or in the 40 years in the Old Testament. And the narrator's affect towards rain has radically changed, right? You really miss something when you don't get it anymore, right? Whereas you're getting your water and you don't want it at the beginning, and you're fearing it as a source of death. And now you're seeing it as a source of life, and you're dying, as he says, right, with a little patience.
Yeah. It makes me wonder if there's some way in which water could at least partly be connected with the tradition itself that precedes Eliot.
Oh.
Right. That is to say, that we can't do without it.
Yeah.
We need it.
Yeah.
But in some way, it's not present.
Yeah.
In the manner that it was at its time.
Yeah.
Right. So when you read Augustine's Confessions, when you read the Aeneid, you are sort of brought there into this world and into this stage of meaningfulness, and where human action and human love can be real.
Yeah.
But now that tradition, in some way, it's all we have.
Yeah.
Because this is what the poem is composed of, are these bits of the tradition.
Yeah.
And yet we don't really have it, and that's why it's fragmented.
Yeah.
We're not able to bring it forward somehow.
Yeah.
We're not able to continue it, I guess.
Continue it. Yeah.
And so, but then again, is Eliot thinking that in some way is he continuing in this poem, or is he more pointing to, well, it would be nice if we could.
Yeah.
We're showing in some way the meaningfulness of the tradition here, and yet currently we're not able to carry it forward in a way that does justice to it.
Yeah, I guess I don't know. At the end of the day, I suppose I'm inclined towards the latter view, that we can't, at least we can't right now go further, right? He has the call for peace at the end, and he does have what the thunder itself says, right, in the final section, which does seem to be a kind of counsel. Maybe that's the closest you get to hope. It's not so much optimism as it is that, well, maybe there's a way out in terms of the three things the thunder says, but it's up to each man, it's up to civilization, current civilization now, to decide whether it wants to respond to the thunder.
And what are the three things the thunder says? You're referring to the words of the Upanishad?
Yeah, that's right.
Indian tradition?
That's right. Yeah, he refers. Yeah, I think the Buddhists are in an earlier section, but in what the thunder said, you get the Hindu tradition, right, which I guess records some stories from the Upanishads, right, from the Hindu spiritual writing, in which the thunder says 3 times says da, right. Maybe I'll just read the line. It says, "Then spoke the thunder da," and then 3 different interpretations of Datta or da are given, right. The first da receives the word Datta, the second one Dayadhvam, which is what you read from the final lines. Actually, that was the third one. And then, the last one is Damyata, which again, his notes help if you don't know Sanskrit, which I don't. But Datta, which is the first understanding of what the thunder was saying, right, is the sense of giving, right? It's a command, I guess, to give. And then the second da, taken as Dayadhvam, is compassion or something like that, feeling for the other. And then the last one, Damyata, is self-control, And so it's as though the thunder is telling you at least what you've lost, maybe what you need to recover as well, to get out of this, what looks like a death spiral that we're all in, right? A self-imposed death spiral. Each of those lines is followed by a sign that it gives you the opposite of what the thunder said, right? So so it says, Datta, what have we given? And then it goes on to describe the opposite, which would be taking, right? And that's sort of this, for example, is an image of something going back to the relationship between the lovers throughout his not a relationship of mutually giving to each other, right? But of exploiting each other, getting from each other what you can. And it's showing you both your crime or your fault or the critical error and possible way out, right? Can you give, right?
Yeah.
Can you exercise compassion? Can you control yourself?
Yeah, and this does kind of circle back to the significance of the man-woman theme here. That that in the midst of the wreckage, but presented in this highly sophisticated and intellectual manner through all these allusions to the previous authors, that in some way the relationship between man and woman is kind of like the nexus on which everything hinges.
Yeah.
And so that strikes me as there's something profound about that that love within these sort of intellectual trappings is just the love between two people is what Eliot's so concerned with.
Yeah,
here.
right. And it's where the absence of it or the defectiveness of it is the cause of the barrenness, right? Or the wasteland itself, right?
Yeah.
The image of the Fisher King, which unfortunately, since I'm not well versed in the Arthurian legends, I don't know the details of, but it has something to do with, and I think there's different versions of it, but it's something to do with a king who has withstood some sort of a wound. It's not clear how it's related to women. Maybe it's not at all related to women or the queen or something. But his wound is what's destroying his land. Somehow his land is sterile and a wasteland because of his wound. And somehow the grail is the only thing that can save him. That's motivating the Arthurian hunt to bring back the grail. So that if he can drink from that, his wound and his land will be restored. So it's that image, I guess, of, again, dryness as opposed to the rain, and the dryness, if you will, of the couple's relationships. Certainly the sterility of it, right? But there's not even any warmth in the images of the sexual act that is portrayed in one way or another. Many times it's always rape, or it's cold, or it's regretted, or it's adulterous, or it culminates in an abortion, like that passage from the pub, right?
Yeah. One of the striking things there is that he is inviting us to see in some way the different perspectives that can be taken. So on the one hand, by creating or showing the analogy between this rape that occurs in modern day London and what happens with Philomel in the Greek tragedy, there's a way in which you're seeing the tragic truth of something like a rape. But then the casualness of the setting that Eliot gives it is as if to suggest, well, is lack of meaning really the stage we're at?
Yeah.
And to try and impose meaning on it would be something kind of forced or artificial. And that makes me wonder, is the very casualness of the tone there, the way he decides to portray it, is he hoping that the reader feels the absence here?
I think so. I mean, it certainly does. It seems like, regardless of your own beliefs about the relationship between man and woman or your religious beliefs, it seems like the typical reader will, again, whether he likes it or not, feel sad and kind of depressed from reading this, right? Yeah. And again, a sense of there's no way out. There's this strange council near the end, but even the council of the thunder, right? You don't know whether whether I should follow that, and B, whether I can. Maybe that's a thing of the past that requires the ancient view of the world, or the relationship between people and of God, maybe. And as long as those ships have sailed, right, it seems like your sense would be just to end with that feeling of grief. But there is that call for peace at the end, right? I don't know if it's a call for peace or if it's just, it could be a kind of peace like, but don't worry about it. Shanti, 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 right? Relax, this is inevitable, right?
Yeah. I do appreciate what you said earlier about the notion that what the reality this poem is imitating is the contemporary landscape.
Yeah.
And that that has to be seen as the inheritor in some way of this massive tradition that's come before, but in this ruined way.
Yeah.
And so to that extent, it seems like, to be honest, to be true to the depiction, it would be really bad for Eliot to try and just throw in something, a kind of deus ex machina, right? Something super comforting at the very end.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that, it's often called a poem of modernity, right? It's one of the emblematic poems of the modernistic approach. And at the very least, it seems like one of the things that has to mean is that to the extent we find meaningfulness or unity in the poem as a whole, it's of a different order entirely than what you'd expect to find in Longfellow or Shakespeare or Homer.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
And I think some of the things we've said have helped illuminate that the kind of unity you might look for here, well, ironically, could be the unity of a certain sort of fragmentation, a version of fragmentation.
Yeah, the unity of a decomposing structure, crumbling body.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. Well, we've covered a lot of the poem. There's so much more that could be said. But just in terms of your own experience with it, do you like The Wasteland?
Yeah. I think I have always liked it, and I've grown to like it more the more I've read it. And maybe it's cheating a little bit, but I've read enough of the sources that he says he's alluding to that I feel like I see it as a whole better than I used to. When we ask our students to read it, aside from Eliot's own notes, we discourage them from doing any research, just drawing on their own experience and what's in the poem, right? We try to get them to see what they can see there, but that's because it's a first reading for them. I think the more you dig into it for second, third readings, I guess I find parts of it very moving, and I tend to want to read it out loud, or parts of it out loud, and because I feel the emotion more. Right? But I certainly understand why some people might not. But I don't think I've ever had a class in which I've taught it where the students didn't say, I like it more now, or something to that effect as a result of discussing it for a couple hours, like we do with the seniors. How about you? I mean, do you find it's challenging? Do you find it an attractive poem, or?
I do, on the whole.
Yeah.
I think something I love about it is the way in which it, especially for one who spends a lot of time with the classics, the way it really does shows you something. It reveals something to you about our world.
Yeah. And we'll add quick addition. In that first part, the narrator even says, I will show you, and maybe it's the angel speaking to the Son of Man, but it says, I will show you fear in a handful of dust, right? That might be a kind of, here's the project of the poem, right? But dust as sort of not a whole, right? Crumbled bits or something like that.
Yeah, and that's contrasted to, so the voice says, I will show you not your shadow lengthening behind you or rising up to meet you at your front, but rather fear in a handful of dust. And I take it that at least part of what that means is you're not going to be able to see the way in which you can extend back into the tradition, right? The way that there's a continuity between you and the tradition, because there isn't. There's been a rupture. There's a fragmentation. Nor are you going to be able to see the future and the where you might be going. And so we can have a sense about our culture and about our times, but one of the great things that poetry can do is to give us a better sense, give us a more parsed out vision of what our times are actually like.
Yeah.
That's extraordinarily valuable. And I don't mean valuable pragmatically, but just for the sake of a kind of self-understanding.
Yeah, right.
And especially for someone who is involved with liberal education, with reading the classics, we're aware of the fact that schools like this and books like this, you see them pop up here and there in our culture, and occasionally movies or something will refer to them, but that's all it is.
Yeah.
And so the kind of fragmentation that's present in this poem, it's sort of this intense distillation of something that we're at least implicitly aware of, but maybe haven't been able to express it to ourselves in that way.
Firsthand.
And why would you think to connect something like casual sex that we hear about as plaguing so many campuses around this country, connect that with the fact that when we hear the word Homer, it has this kind of little glimmer for us, but it doesn't mean a whole lot. Well, Eliot's connecting those things. And that's an impressive thing to be able to do.
Yeah, that's right.
So we probably both have a kind of dark side to us, in virtue of which we're drawn to a poem
if we like
this.
Yeah.
Well, there's a note to end on.
Yeah.
True to the wasteland.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Shanti.
Chris.
Yeah.